The day the authorities took my home, a place worth $1 million, felt like my entire life was being stripped away brick by brick. All because I refused to bend to the will of my arrogant, smooth-talking son-in-law, a Wall Street shark who'd built his fortune on lies and manipulation. The locks were changed without a shred of hesitation, and as they handed me the final insult, "Go live in a shelter, Grandpa," something inside me snapped. My fingers shook, not from fear, but from fury as I dialed 911. What happened after that would leave them pale, their arrogance crumbling like wet plaster. But let's rewind, because the story really began weeks earlier. It was July 1st. The exact date had been set like a business appointment, and Emily, my only daughter, had promised she'd be there at precisely 2 o'clock. She was punctual to the minute. I just finished my morning coffee, letting the warmth linger in my hands, when I heard the doorbell ring. My left leg, still stiff from a shrapnel injury in Vietnam, protested as I stood. Summer heat always made the old wound ache, but I forced myself toward the door. Through the peephole, I caught sight of her. Emily, with her perfectly styled blonde hair shimmering in the Cleveland sunlight, and Mark, her husband, standing beside her like a stock photo businessman in his immaculate $1,000 suit. "Dad!" Emily's voice had that strange, bright tone I'd learned to distrust. The kind of cheerfulness that sounded practiced, almost staged. She hugged me, but her arms were stiff, her designer perfume masking the warm, familiar scent I remembered from when she was a little girl. Mark followed with his trademark Wall Street smile, the kind that had probably closed more fraudulent deals than I could count. He extended a manicured hand, his grip calculated to assert dominance. But I'd spent decades working construction before the war, and even at 75, my handshake could still remind a man what real strength felt like. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a win. Come in, I said, stepping aside. "Got iced tea in the kitchen." They made themselves comfortable in my living room like they were appraising it for a real estate listing. Mark's gaze moved across the worn but well-kept furniture, the framed photographs of my late wife Martha, and the shadow box holding my military medals. His expression didn't change, but I could feel the silent judgment in the room. "Dad, the house looks..." Emily hesitated, searching for the right words. "Exactly the same." "Why would I change it?" I replied. "Your mother picked most of this furniture, still serves its purpose." Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Actually, Robert, that's part of why we're here." His voice carried that fake warmth people use right before they try to sell you something you don't need, or take something you do. "We've been thinking about your future," he said, "about what's best for you." I set my glass of iced tea down with deliberate care. I'd heard this tone before, in union meetings, in lawyers' offices, and in the tense moments before someone tries to take advantage of you while pretending they're doing you a favor. "My future," I said evenly, locking eyes with him, "seems just fine to me." Emily's eyes flicked toward her husband for the briefest moment, a silent exchange, quick but telling, before she turned back to me. Those big, ocean blue eyes had once been her mother's trademark, filled with warmth and laughter, but now they seemed polished, rehearsed, as if she were playing a role she wasn't sure she believed in. "Dad," she began softly, "we're worried about you living here all alone." I stayed quiet, letting her speak, though my gut already told me where this was heading. "You're not getting any younger," she continued, her tone balancing between concern and a gentle scold. "And this big house, well, it's a lot for one person to manage." I gave a small shrug. "I've managed just fine." Mark's voice cut in like a sudden draft, sharper, colder. "But for how long?" He leaned forward, his elbows planted firmly on his knees. "What happens when you can't climb those stairs anymore? What happens when you fall and no one's around to help?" The afternoon light streaming in through the tall windows seemed to grow harsher, throwing deep shadows across the living room. I studied Mark's face, watching the way his jaw tightened when he talked about my so-called limitations, like my age was some sort of burden he'd been forced to carry. "I appreciate your concern," I said slowly, my voice calm but deliberate. "But I'm not ready for a nursing home." Emily let out a brittle laugh, the sound brittle enough to crack. Who said anything about a nursing home? No, Dad. We're talking about something much better than that. That's when Mark reached into his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a portfolio, the kind that screamed expensive attorney or high-end corporate deal. Even the way he set it on the coffee table had a certain smugness to it, like he was unveiling the solution to all my problems. We found an excellent assisted living community, he said smoothly. It's in Florida. Beautiful weather, lots of activities, people your own age. You'd love it. And what about my house? I asked, my voice steady but with an edge I didn't bother to hide. Mark's smile widened. Well, that's where our expertise comes in. I have deep connections in real estate. Emily and I could handle the sale for you personally. Take that burden right off your shoulders. The only sound in the room was the slow, rhythmic ticking of Martha's grandfather clock in the corner. I let it fill the silence while I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, searching for even a flicker of the little girl who used to help me plant tomatoes in the backyard, who cried when she accidentally stepped on an ant because she didn't want to hurt anything. And my money? I asked quietly. Your money would be safe, Mark replied, his voice wrapped in silk, his fingers drumming lightly against the portfolio. In fact, I could invest it for you. Double it within a year. I have access to opportunities most people will never even hear about. And there it was. The truth finally stepped out from behind their well-rehearsed smiles. This wasn't about my well-being or keeping me safe. It wasn't about family. It was about the house, the money, the profit. A dull ache bloomed in my chest, the same kind of deep hurt I hadn't felt since the day we buried Martha. Emily reached across and took my hand. Her touch was soft, familiar, almost enough to make me forget the words she'd just let her husband speak. I felt the smoothness of her skin, the weight of the wedding ring he'd put there, the entire life she'd built, a life so far from the values her mother and I had tried to instill. Dad, she said, her voice trembling just slightly, we just want what's best for you. We want you to be comfortable, safe. I squeezed her hand gently, my gaze never leaving hers. I need some time to think about this, I said, and I meant it, though not in the way they hoped. Mark's jaw tightened again, that little tick of his giving away the irritation beneath his polished smile. Of course, Robert, take all the time you need, he said, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. Then he added, almost like a warning, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't wait forever. I didn't respond. I simply walked them to the door, watching as they stepped into their luxury SUV, the glossy paint glistening in the afternoon light. Emily gave a small wave, but her eyes didn't meet mine. When the door clicked shut, the house seemed to exhale, leaving me in a silence so deep I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I stood for a moment in my empty living room, the shadows stretching longer across the floor, swallowing the familiar outlines of furniture Martha had chosen. The old grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, its chime marking each passing minute, each second, time that suddenly felt far more precious than it had when I woke that morning. That night, sleep never came. My mind kept replaying every word of their visit, every shift in Mark's tone, every flicker of unease in Emily's eyes. I thought about the word opportunity, how easily it rolled off his tongue, and how hollow it sounded when I pictured them selling my home, not just a piece of property, and turning my life into a number on a bank ledger. By morning, a steady drizzle had settled over the neighborhood, the kind of rain that seeps into your bones, the kind that carries a certain heaviness with it. My knee throbbed, my back ached, but I was already up and dressed long before the phone rang. It was 8:30. I'd been at my kitchen table for an hour, the morning paper untouched, my coffee growing cold beside it. The gray light from outside made the steam from my cup look like ghostly threads. Dad, Emily's voice came through the line, overly bright. I hope I'm not calling too early. I've been up since 5, sweetheart, I said. You know how it is. Her laugh was quick, hollow. Right, of course. She hesitated only a moment before sliding into her pitch. Listen, Mark and I were talking last night, and we really think this Florida place could be perfect for you. I did some research online. It has a pool, a library, even a workshop where you could tinker with things just like you used to. I let her words hang in the air as my gaze drifted to the window. Across the way, Mrs. Patterson, 82 years old and as stubborn as ever, was in her garden tending her roses despite the rain. Her hooded raincoat was speckled with droplets, but she moved with awareness and purpose, her pruning shears flashing silver as she clipped away the dead blooms. She still drove herself to the grocery store every Thursday, still lived in the same house she'd shared with her late husband. No one had tried to relocate her in the name of help. "Emily," I said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, Dad." "When your mother was sick, do you remember what she told you about taking care of family?" There was a pause, a faint rustle on the line as though she were shifting in her seat. She said family always comes first." "That's right," I said quietly. "She said we take care of each other, not take from each other." "I don't understand what you mean," Emily replied quickly, but there was a tremor in her voice, the kind that told me she understood perfectly well. "Your mother left me this house, Emily. She left me my independence, and she taught you better than what you're trying to do here." "Dad, you're being dramatic. We're trying to help you." "No," I cut in, my tone sharper now. "You're trying to help yourselves." The line went silent except for the faint sound of her breathing. It felt like a long time before she spoke again. When she did, her voice was smaller, softer, closer to the daughter I remembered from years ago. "Mark says the investment is guaranteed. He says we could all benefit from it." "And what do you say, Emily?" I asked quietly. "What does my daughter say?" "Not Mark's wife, my daughter." There was a pause, the kind of silence that makes the air feel heavier. I don't know anymore, Dad," she said at last, her voice wavering. "Things are complicated, money's tight, and Mark has these opportunities." I gave a humorless chuckle. "Money's always tight, sweetheart. That's not new. What's new is thinking you can solve it by stealing from your father." Her breath caught. "We're not stealing, You're just what?" I pressed, my voice rising. "Go ahead, say it." There was another pause, then it came. A sound I hadn't heard in decades. Soft, trembling suds. And suddenly I wasn't hearing the voice of a grown woman anymore. I was hearing my little girl at 7 years old crying because she'd knocked over Martha's favorite vase. The shame and helplessness tangled together in her tears. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, but Mark says if we don't do this, if we don't find a way to make more money, we might lose the house in New York. The mortgage payments are crushing us, and his job, the market's been difficult." And there it was, the truth, laid bare at last. "So," I said slowly, "you thought you'd solve your problems with my life savings." "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that, Emily," I cut in sharply, "and you know it." In the background, I heard another voice, Mark's, sharp and urgent, like a drill sergeant barking orders. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough. Emily's crying stopped suddenly as if a switch had been flipped. Her voice returned, flatter now. "Dad, I have to go, but please, just think about what we talked about. Think about your future." "I'm thinking about it, sweetheart," I said evenly. "I'm thinking about it very carefully." When the line went dead, the silence in my kitchen was deafening. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the steady patter of rain against the windows. My eyes drifted to the refrigerator door, where Martha's photograph had been for years. She was smiling in it, that warm, knowing smile. But in my mind's eye, I saw her looking at me now with quiet disappointment. The same heaviness I felt pressing against my ribs. I reached for the phone again, my fingers curling around it with the kind of resolve that leaves no room for hesitation. I dialed a number I'd memorized years ago, never imagining I'd have to use it. "Reed Investigations," came the voice on the other end. "Jack speaking?" "Jack, it's Robert Thompson," I said. "We met at the VFW last year." "Robert, of course. How are you holding up?" "I need your help with something," I told him. "Something involving my family." Jack's tone shifted instantly. No more casual warmth, just the weight of a man who'd seen too many of these cases. "Family's always the hardest, Robert. You sure you want to do this?" I looked around my kitchen at the home Martha and I had built board by board, paycheck by paycheck, across half a century of honest work. I thought of the sacrifices we'd made, the dreams we'd shelved, the trust we'd placed in raising a daughter who would honor that legacy. "I'm sure, Jack," I said. "I think my daughter and her husband are planning to rob me blind, and I need to know exactly what they're up to before they do it. I'll be over this afternoon." "Thank you, Jack." "Don't thank me yet, Robert," and he replied. "In cases like this, you might not like what I find." But as I hung up the phone, my hand still resting on the receiver, I realized something cold and bitter. I already knew what he would find. The real question wasn't if Emily and Mark were plotting against me. It was how far they were willing to go. It wasn't whether they were planning to take what I had. It was how far they were willing to go to make it happen. Jack Reed showed up at exactly 3 o'clock. The kind of punctuality that comes from years of police work where minutes could mean the difference between catching a suspect and losing him forever. He carried a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had been through a few too many stakeouts and late-night interrogations. Jack was in his early 50s now, the black in his hair giving way to threads of gray. His build was still solid, but it was his eyes that told the real story. Sharp, careful eyes that measured every word, every movement. They were the eyes of a man who had spent 2 decades as a Cleveland police detective, learning to trust nobody and verify everything. "Coffee?" I offered as he settled into my armchair. "Black if you've got it." In the kitchen, I poured 2 steaming cups, then returned to the living room. I noticed how he'd chosen his seat so he had a clear line of sight to both the front door and the hallway that led to the back of the house. Old habits die hard. "Tell me what's going on, Robert," he said, setting the cup down within easy reach. I started from the beginning. The visit yesterday, Emily's too bright smile, Mark's slick reassurances, the underlying edge in every word. I told him about the call this morning, about the Florida retirement opportunity, and the investment pitch that followed close behind. As I spoke, the knot in my stomach tightened. Jack didn't interrupt. He just listened, occasionally scribbling notes into a small, battered notebook with a stub of a pencil. His face barely changed, but I noticed his eyes narrow slightly when I mentioned certain details. "The Florida place," he said when I finished. "They give you a name?" "Sunset Gardens. Mark said it was in Tampa." Jack made another note, his hand moving quickly. "And the investment? Any specifics?" "Just that he could double my money in a year, through his connections." "Uh-huh." Jack's voice was neutral, but the slight tightening at the corners of his eyes told me more than his words. "Robert," he said finally, leaning forward, "I'm going to be straight with you. What you're describing sounds like a textbook setup. Step 1, the assisted living story. That gets you out of the house and out of the way. Step 2, power of attorney. That gives them control of your assets. Step 3, the investment pitch. That's how they make the money disappear legally." I swallowed hard. "Oh, but Emily's my daughter. She might not even know she's part of a con," Jack cut in gently. "Some of these guys, they're real good at convincing their wives they're legitimate businessmen. They make them believe they're in on an opportunity, when really..." He let the unfinished thought hang in the air. He flipped open his briefcase and pulled out a crisp legal document. "I'm going to need you to sign this contract, and I'll need a retainer. $500 to start, and I bill $50 an hour plus expenses." I didn't hesitate. My signature went on the dotted line, and I wrote the check with a steady hand. "How long will it take?" "Give me a week," Jack said. "I'll run a full background check on Mark, verify his employment, and dig into this Florida facility. I'll also set up some discreet surveillance." "Surveillance? Oh." "Sometimes," he said, meeting my eyes, "people reveal their true intentions when they think nobody's watching." That evening, after he left, I sat in the stillness of my living room for a long time. The rain had eased outside, but the weight in my chest hadn't. Finally, I reached for the phone. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed, not from age, but from the gravity of what I was about to do. "Dad?" Emily's voice came through, bright and expectant. "I was hoping you'd call. Mark and I have been talking, and we really think..." "I've made a decision, Emily." There was a beat of silence before her voice lifted, warm with excitement. "You have?" I want to see the paperwork, I said evenly. All of it. The Florida facility details, the investment documents, everything. Of course, she said quickly. Mark will be so pleased. He's already started preparing the documents. Her voice sounded lighter now. Mine didn't. You'll need to sign, she said. Not review, not look over, not give my approval. Sign. That single word drew a sharp line in my mind. One side was information meant for me to consider. The other was a legal trap in it for me to step into willingly. The distinction wasn't lost on me. When can you bring them over? I asked, keeping my voice even. How about this weekend? Emily's tone was light, casual, as if she were talking about dropping off a pie. Saturday afternoon. Mark wants to go over everything carefully with you. He says it's important that you understand all the benefits. Saturday sounds fine. Oh, Dad, she gushed, relief flooding her voice. This is wonderful. You're going to love Florida. And the money. Mark says with his contacts, we could see returns of up to 200%, maybe even more. 200%. The number hung in the air like a bad smell, sweet and rotten all at once. In my 40 years swinging a hammer, then running a crew, I'd never seen a legitimate investment come within shouting distance of that kind of promise. Emily, I said slowly, can I ask you something? Anything, Dad. Do you remember what your mother used to say about deals that sound too good to be true? There was a pause. I could almost hear her thinking. She said, they usually are. That's right, sweetheart. She was a smart woman, your mother. A flicker of hesitation crept into Emily's voice. Dad, are you having second thoughts? Because Mark says, I'm not having second thoughts, Emily, I cut in. I'm just remembering your mother's wisdom. When the call ended, I set the phone down and let the silence settle over me. I walked through my house, really seeing it for the first time in months. The hardwood floors Martha and I had sanded and stained by hand, still holding the warmth of our labor. The kitchen where she'd stood with Emily on a step stool, teaching her to roll cookie dough just right. The living room where we'd unwrapped Christmas presents under the glow of multicolored lights, hosted birthday parties filled with laughter, and shared quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper spread across our laps. Now they wanted to take all of it, strip the place bare, sell it off, and funnel the money into some opportunity that would leave me with nothing but regrets and empty rooms. My life's work, gone in the stroke of a pen. But they'd made one fatal miscalculation. They'd assumed that age meant weakness. They'd forgotten I'd survived Vietnam, that I'd built a business from the ground up with nothing but calloused hands and stubborn grit, that I'd raised a family on principles that didn't bend for greed. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I realized something unexpected. I was almost looking forward to Saturday, because by then Jack would have started digging and I'd have a clearer picture of exactly who and what I was dealing with. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 as I reached the top of the stairs. Each strike was deep and steady, a heartbeat in the quiet, reminding me that time was precious and that some people had already wasted far too much of mine. Thursday morning, Jack called while I was nursing my second cup of coffee, the sunrise spilling gold across my kitchen walls. Robert, he said, his voice sharper than usual, you need to sit down for this. I'm already sitting, I told him. What did you find? 3 days of digging, he said, and Sunset Gardens doesn't exist. The Tampa address they gave you? Jack's voice crackled through the phone. It's a vacant lot, has been for 2 years. My coffee, moments ago warm and comforting, turned bitter in my mouth. I set the mug down slowly, as though it had suddenly become heavier. And Mark's investment opportunity? I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. Classic Ponzi scheme, Jack replied grimly. I tracked down 3 other families in New York who lost everything to the exact same pitch. Same promises of impossible returns, same neatly printed documents, same smooth-talking confidence. And then, poof, they vanished. The words slammed into me like a hammer. In my mind, the pieces began clicking together one by one. Too clean, too precise, like ammunition sliding into a rifle chamber. A weapon being readied. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice low. At least 18 months, Jack said. maybe longer. Robert, your daughter might not know the full extent of what her husbands have been doing, or he hesitated. She might know exactly what she's doing. The silence between us stretched, heavy as lead. I took a breath and steadied myself. Either way, I have a decision to make. What's our next step? I'll be recording everything on Saturday, Jack said. I've got equipment that can pick up conversations from 3 rooms away. But Robert, you need to be careful. If they suspect, I cut him off. Let me worry about that, Jack. These two forgot who they're dealing with. Friday felt like it lasted a week. I cleaned the house twice, organized my paperwork 3 times, and still found myself pacing from room to room with too much energy and nowhere to put it. At noon, I drove to the cemetery, as I did every Friday, and stood before Martha's headstone. The roses I'd planted last spring were in full bloom now, deep crimson against the cold gray marble. I told her about Emily, about Mark, about the documents they were planning to bring me. I spoke in a low voice as if confiding in her could steady the storm inside my chest. By Saturday morning, the air felt heavier. I watched the clock all day, the tick of each second dragging me closer to the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Emily's car turned into my driveway. Mark's tall frame and confident stride were visible even through the windshield. He stepped out first, briefcase in hand, moving like a man who believed the world was his to claim. 3 houses down, Jack's surveillance van sat disguised as a cable repair truck. Through my kitchen window, I caught a glimpse of him adjusting his equipment, his face set with quiet focus. The doorbell rang. "Dad!" Emily's voice was overly bright, her smile just a little too wide. "Are you ready to start your new life?" Before I could answer, Mark swept past her, his polished shoes clicking against my hardwood floor, his briefcase held like a conqueror's banner. "Robert, today's the day we make you rich." They spread their documents across my dining table with cold efficiency, power of attorney forms, property transfer deeds, investment contracts boasting returns so outrageous they made lottery winnings seem modest. "See here," Mark said smoothly, tapping the page with a gold pen. "This gives Emily and me the authority to manage your assets while you're settling into your new home in Florida. And this," Emily added, her voice faltering for just a heartbeat, "transfers the deed to the house temporarily, just until we can get the best price for it." Their eyes gleamed with expectation. They thought the trap was about to close, but they didn't realize I'd already seen the teeth of it, and I was sharpening my own. I lifted the power of attorney document from the table, my fingers steady despite the storm building in my chest. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind used to make lies look legitimate. My eyes went straight to the signature line. There it was, my name, already written in a hand that wasn't mine. The ink flowed smoothly, the loops and strokes eerily similar to my own. The forgery was exquisite, almost perfect. Almost. A small imperfection in the armor of Robert told me everything I needed to know. They'd been preparing for this long before today. "You've both put a lot of work into this," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. Mark's chest swelled with pride and awe, his gold watch catching the light as he adjusted his cuff. "I have connections, Robert, people who can make things happen quickly and quietly." I gave him a slow nod. "I'm sure you do." I placed the document down gently as though it were fragile, though every fiber of my being wanted to tear it in half. Then I turned to Emily. "Sweetheart, could you get me a glass of water? This is a lot to take in." She sprang to her feet, almost too quickly, as if eager to do something, anything that might cleanse her from the growing stench of guilt. I watched her disappear into the kitchen, her footsteps quick and uneven. The moment she was out of earshot, Mark leaned forward, his elbows pressing into the polished wood of my dining table. His voice dropped to a low, conspiratorial tone, like a predator coaxing his prey closer. "Between you and me, Robert, the sooner we get this done, the better. Emily's been worried sick about you living here alone. This," he gestured to the spread of legal documents, "this benefits everyone, even you." He paused, his smile sharpening into something cold and greedy. "Especially me. I'm going to make sure your money works harder than it ever has before. Emily returned, setting the glass of water in front of me. Her hands were trembling, the ripples on the surface of the glass betraying her unease. Dad, are you feeling all right? You look pale. Just thinking, I said, taking a slow sip, buying myself time. Let them think I was hesitating because of uncertainty, not because I was letting Jack's surveillance gear collect every drop of their treachery. Mark, I said, setting down the glass, walk me through exactly how this investment works. For the next 20 minutes, he wove his web with the precision of a seasoned con artist. Offshore accounts, guaranteed returns, special connections in the right places. Every word was polished, rehearsed, designed to sound like opportunity instead of theft. Emily nodded along like a dutiful echo, her shoulders relaxing with each fabricated promise. Finally, Mark slid the pen across the table toward me, the motion smooth, confident, certain of victory. All we need is your signature, Robert. Right here, here, and here. I picked up the pen, feeling its weight in my hand. I could sense Jack's microphones catching every rustle of paper, every calculated breath. My thumb rested on the clicker, and for a moment, I let the silence hang between us. Then I looked Mark in the eye. You know what, Mark? I think I need to make a phone call first. His confident smile faltered. A phone call? To who? Without answering, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old flip phone. The plastic felt cool in my hand, familiar, almost comforting. My fingers pressed 3 deliberate numbers. A crisp voice answered. 911. What your emergency? Mark's face went white, drained in an instant, as if someone had pulled the plug on his blood supply. Emily froze, her eyes wide. The glass of water she'd just handed me slipped from her grasp, shattering on the hardwood, the shards scattering like fallen stars. Yes, hello, I said clearly, my voice carrying all the steadiness of a man who'd fought harder battles than this. I need to report a crime in progress. My name is Robert Thompson, and I'm at 412 Maple Street in Parma. The trap had been sprung. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I forced them out with steady precision. My daughter and son-in-law are attempting to steal my house and my life savings through forged documents. For a moment, silence hung between me and the dispatcher. Then her voice came through, faint and crackling over my old flip phone's speaker. Sir, are you in immediate danger? I glanced at the 2 people standing in my living room, the ones I had once welcomed with open arms, the ones who now stood on the edge of destroying the life I'd built. Not physical danger, I said, my voice low but resolute. But they're trying to force me to sign fraudulent papers right now. Mark's eyes widened. He lunged for the phone, his movement quick but clumsy, driven by panic rather than control. He had underestimated me. 40 years of construction work, lifting beams, hauling stone, and fighting through more pain than most men half my age, had left me stronger than I looked. I shifted my weight, holding the phone out of reach with ease. Sir, the dispatcher said firmly, officers are en route. Please stay on the line. Emily's breathing turned shallow, her chest rising and falling too fast. Her mascara ran in jagged black rivers down her cheeks, streaking the face I had once kissed goodnight when she was a little girl. Dad, what are you doing? She cried, her voice breaking. We're family. I locked eyes with her, and for the first time in years, she couldn't hold my gaze. Family doesn't steal from families, sweetheart. Mark recovered quickly, his slick, Wall Street-trained composure snapping back like a mask. He began gathering up the documents with frantic hands, trying to erase the evidence. This is insane, Robert, he hissed. You've lost your mind, Emily. We're leaving now. Actually, I said, walking to the front door, you're not. I pulled the door wide, letting the afternoon air swirl into the room, carrying with it the faint wail of sirens, growing louder with every passing second. Mark froze mid-step, the paper still clutched in his fists. His face drained of color, his eyes darting to the window as if searching for an escape route. You can't prove anything, he said, but his voice had lost the oily confidence it carried minutes before. Can I? I pulled my phone from my pocket again, my thumb scrolling until I found the file I'd been saving for this exact moment. Jack's equipment isn't the only thing that records conversations. Mark, From the tiny speaker, his own voice filled the room, smug and damning. "Emily, we'll just sign for him. The old man won't notice anything, and when he does, it'll be too late." Emily gasped, a sound sharp enough to cut the air in half. "Mark, you said we were just helping him?" Two police officers appeared at my doorway, walking with the measured pace of men who had seen every flavor of human deceit. The older one had gray at his temples and eyes that carried the weight of 100 family betrayals. His younger partner looked fresh out of the academy, his posture straight, his gaze scanning every corner of the room. "Good afternoon, officers," I greeted, my voice calm but my heart pounding steady and strong. "I'm Robert Thompson. I called about an attempted fraud." Officer Johnson, the older one, stepped forward, his gaze flicking over the scene. The scattered papers on my coffee table, Emily's tear-streaked face, Mark's panicked stare, and me, standing solid in the middle of it all. "Mr. Thompson, can you explain what's happening here?" I nodded slowly. "My daughter and her husband came here today to steal my house and my savings. They brought forged documents and tried to pressure me into signing them." Mark stepped forward, desperate to reclaim control. "Officers, this is a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "My father-in-law is elderly and confused. We're simply trying to help him manage his affairs." I turned to face him fully, my voice steady as granite. "I'm 75 years old, Mark, not brain dead, and I have evidence of your fraud." The younger officer, Smith, had already crouched down, gathering the papers Mark had dropped in his rush. He studied them with sharp eyes. "Sir," he asked, looking up at me, "did you sign any of these documents?" "Not yet," I said. Then I pointed at the pages in his hand. "But take a close look at those signature lines." They had already filled in the signature lines, my name scrawled there in handwriting that looked like a clumsy impersonation of my own. Even from several feet away, I could tell it wasn't mine. Johnson took the stack of papers from Officer Smith, his eyes narrowing as he compared the signatures against my driver's license. The frown that creased his face was deep and unmistakable. "Mr. Wilson, is it?" Johnson's voice was calm, but it carried a quiet weight that made Mark flinch. "Can you explain why Mr. Thompson's signature is pre-written on these forms?" Mark's composure, the slick Wall Street confidence he wore like a tailored suit, began to crumble. His words stumbled out, jagged and unsure. That's just a sample signature. For reference purposes." Johnson's brow arched. "Reference for what exactly?" Emily's voice, trembling but desperate, suddenly cut in. "Officers, please, this is all just a terrible misunderstanding. My father asked us to help with his finances, and we were just—" "Emily," my voice sliced through her excuse, sharp and cold. "Stop lying. You're already in enough trouble as it is." Her mouth snapped shut, her shoulders curling inward under the weight of my tone. Meanwhile, Smith was crouched down, photographing the incriminating documents from every angle, his camera shutter clicking like a countdown to the moment their lies would detonate. Johnson kept his gaze on me. "Mr. Thompson, you mentioned earlier that you had evidence of fraud. What kind of evidence are we talking about?" I unlocked my phone, my thumb scrolling through the recordings I'd stored like bullets in a loaded chamber. I have audio recordings of my son-in-law admitting to forging documents and outlining his plan to steal my property. I also have photographs of similar scams he's pulled on other families. Names, dates, even the property deeds he tried to alter. Mark's skin had drained of all color, shifting from pale to an unhealthy gray. His jaw tightened. "You can't record private conversations without consent. That's illegal." I met his eyes, unblinking. "Actually, in Ohio, I can record any conversation I'm a part of. And since this is my house, I had every right to document what was happening here." Johnson glanced at Smith, a silent exchange passing between them. 20 years on the job had taught Johnson to recognize guilt the same way a hunter can smell fear. He turned back to Mark. "Mr. Wilson, I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back." Mark's voice shot up in pitch, his words scrambling for air. "You can't arrest me. I have connections. I'll have your badges." But his bluster was hollow now. Each threat, nothing more than the desperate noise of a man watching his careful tower of lies collapse in on itself. Johnson's hands moved with practiced ease. locking the cuffs around Mark's wrists. The sound of metal clicking shut was almost satisfying. Emily dropped into my living room chair, the strength gone from her legs. Her designer dress bunched awkwardly, her once flawless makeup streaked into a mask of ruin. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to go this far." I looked at her, my daughter, yet somehow a stranger, and felt something in my chest tear. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even grief. It was the quiet, final knowledge that some wounds don't heal. "Some things, Emily," I said softly, "can't be undone with apologies." Behind us, Officer Smith's voice was steady and deliberate as he began reading Mark his Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent." And then right on cue, Jack's surveillance van rolled up outside. Through the front window, I watched him step out, carrying his professional-grade recording equipment like a soldier returning from battle. The look on his face told me everything had been captured. Every word, every lie, every damning piece of the puzzle. The truth was no longer mine to protect. It was evidence now, and it was enough to end this for good. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Mark's struggles against the handcuffs were almost pitiful. Jerky, desperate movements that reminded me of a fish flopping helplessly on dry land. "This is harassment," he barked, his voice a strained mixture of panic and arrogance. "I demand to speak to my lawyer immediately." "You'll get your phone call at the station," Johnson replied evenly, not a hint of irritation in his tone. It was clear from the steady, practiced cadence of his voice that he had dealt with Mark's kind before. Men who wore expensive suits and carried the smug belief that enough money could bend the law to their will. Emily sat in my armchair, frozen. Her wide, glassy eyes followed the scene in front of her like she was watching her entire world collapse in slow motion. Her hands twisted in her lap, knuckles white. When Officer Smith approached her with his notebook in hand, she flinched, as though the paper itself could hurt her. "Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions about your involvement in this scheme," Smith began. I didn't know it was illegal," she stammered, glancing nervously at her husband. "Mark said we were helping Dad manage his money better." The lie drifted through the room like cigarette smoke, thin, choking, impossible to ignore. Even Emily seemed to realize how hollow it sounded. Without a word, I pulled my phone from my pocket and then scrolled until I found the file I was looking for. "Officer, you might want to hear this recording from 3 days ago." Emily's voice filled the room, crisp and unmistakable. "Dad, we just want what's best for you. We want you to be comfortable and safe." Then Mark's voice, slightly more distant, but still perfectly clear. "Get him to sign everything today. Once we have power of attorney, the old man won't be able to stop us, even if he figures it out." Emily's face crumpled, her lips trembling. "Dad, how could you record us? We're family." I looked her in the eye, my voice low but unyielding. "Family doesn't try to steal everything I've worked 50 years to build." Johnson finished with Mark and turned his attention toward Emily. "Ma'am, based on what we've heard here today, I'm placing you under arrest as well for conspiracy to commit fraud." "No, please," she gasped, her voice breaking. "I have children to think about. This was all Mark's idea." "Tell it to the judge," Smith said. His tone wasn't cruel, but there was no room for sympathy. As they led her toward the second police car that had pulled up outside, Emily turned to me one last time, her voice shaking. "Dad, please don't let them take me away from my kids. You should have thought about your children before you tried to rob their grandfather." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, and the way her face broke under them didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it might. She was still my daughter, the little girl who once spent summer afternoons in the garage helping me build birdhouses, the child who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her bedtime stories. Mark was shoved into the first police car, still shouting about his connections and lawyers, his voice carrying the desperate edge of a man whose carefully woven schemes had unraveled beyond repair. Through the window, I saw him fumble with the phone, probably trying to call some high-powered friend to make this all vanish. Emily went more quietly. I could see her shoulders trembling, her sobs silent but deep, and in them I heard an echo of her mother's cries the day Martha learned her cancer was terminal. As the police cars rolled away, carrying what was left of my family toward whatever justice awaited them. Jack appeared at my front door. He was carrying his recording equipment, his expression grim but certain. "Robert," he said softly, "you did the right thing." I stared at the papers scattered across my dining room table, the damning evidence of their betrayal tangled among the wreckage of our relationship. Did I? Because it feels like I just destroyed my only child's life. "She destroyed her own life the moment she decided to steal from you," Jack replied. "You just refused to be a victim." The neighbor's dog wouldn't stop barking, its sharp, frantic yelps carrying over the fence like an alarm that wouldn't be silenced. Across the way, Mrs. Patterson stood on her porch, one hand curled around her coffee mug, the other resting on the railing as if steadying herself against the weight of the spectacle. She had that look, the wide-eyed curiosity of someone whose life had been uneventful for far too long, now suddenly gifted front-row seats to a real-life drama. She didn't call out to me, and I didn't acknowledge her. We both knew she would have the whole story or her own version of it, circulating through the neighborhood by sundown. Small towns had a way of turning truth into legend before the ink on the police report was even dry. Jack's voice broke the air between us. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, my tone heavy, "the legal system takes over. With everything we've got on them, they'll probably plead guilty just to avoid the trial." Jack leaned against the doorway, folding his arms. "Mark's in deep. With his record, and if they dig up other victims, he's looking at real time. Years, maybe decades." "And Emily?" My throat caught on her name. Jack hesitated, a flicker of compassion crossing his face. "First offense. If she cooperates, she might get probation, especially with the kids. Judges tend to be lenient if there's still hope." I lowered myself into the chair at my dining table, the same table where I'd celebrated birthdays, Christmas dinners, and quiet Sunday breakfasts with my family. Now it felt cold and foreign beneath my hands. The exhaustion in my bones was suddenly unbearable. I felt all 75 years of my life pressing down on me, every wrinkle a reminder of battles fought, loves lost, and now, betrayals endured. The house had gone still again, but it wasn't the gentle stillness of peace. This was a hollow, aching quiet, the kind that comes when laughter has been replaced by absence. "You know what the worst part is, Jack?" My voice was low, but it cracked in the middle. "What's that?" "I still love her." I stared at my hands, trembling slightly. After everything she tried to do to me, after the schemes, she's still my little girl, and I still love her. Jack began gathering the scattered documents from the table, careful with each one. Now they were more than just papers. They were evidence in a criminal case. Love doesn't mean letting people destroy you, Robert. Sometimes loving someone means drawing lines they don't want to see. Through the kitchen window, I caught sight of Martha's rose garden in full bloom, the petals glowing in the late afternoon light. For a moment, the sight brought back the sound of her laughter as she knelt in the dirt, coaxing life from the soil with her gentle hands. Tomorrow I would visit her grave. I would tell her how our daughter, our pride and joy, had traded family for greed. I would tell her how the girl we'd raised with such hope had tried to take away the life we had built together piece by piece. But not today. Today I had survived. Today the old soldier had fought his last battle and won. Yet the victory was bitter, tasting more of ash than of glory. The phone began to ring. I didn't move to answer it. The sound echoed through the empty house, bouncing off walls lined with photographs of smiling faces, ghosts of a time when love seemed unshakable, when money was just paper and family was everything. It was probably a reporter. News about wealthy people being arrested traveled faster than wildfire in a small town. The next morning, the Cleveland police station looked different under the steady light of day. Less charged with adrenaline than it had been during the chaos, more subdued, more like the machinery of justice quietly grinding forward. Detective Thomas White met me at the door. He had the weathered face of a man who'd spent 20 years listening to lies about money, family, and trust. His handshake was firm, his grip steady. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes were sharp, assessing but not unkind. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "thank you for coming in. I know yesterday wasn't easy. We settled into interview room 3, a cramped, windowless box painted in a shade of beige that felt like it had been chosen specifically to drain the color from life. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, buzzing like an impatient insect, casting a harsh glare that made even the innocent look guilty. The air was cool but stale, heavy with the scent of too many secrets spilled within these walls. I carried my folder of documents as though it were a weapon. Inside, every page, every photo, every scrap of paper was arranged with meticulous care, the way Martha used to organize her recipe cards, with neat handwritten labels and everything in its proper place. She had believed in order, in keeping things where they belonged. I wondered what she would think now, seeing our daughter's betrayal cataloged in ink and evidence. Detective White, a man with the steady composure of someone who had heard every lie in the book, opened his notebook with deliberate calm. "I want to make sure we have the complete timeline, CH1, he said, his pen poised. "When did you first suspect your daughter and son-in-law were planning to defraud you?" "July 1st, I answered without hesitation, the moment they walked into my house with their Florida fairy tale. The words tasted bitter. I remembered their smiles, wide, rehearsed, the kind you see on salespeople right before they hand you the pen to sign away your life. White's pen scratched across the paper in slow, measured strokes. "But you didn't contact police immediately." "No," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I contacted someone better." The door opened with a quiet creak, and in walked Jack Reed. He carried a briefcase so heavy it seemed to bend his shoulder slightly, but he moved with the measured confidence of a man who knew its contents could end careers and put people behind bars for decades. He set it down on the table with the kind of care you'd give to something dangerous. "Detective White," Jack said, extending a firm handshake. "I'm Jack Reed, private investigator. Mr. Thompson hired me 4 days ago to document this fraud." White raised an eyebrow. 4 days ago? You've been investigating since July 2nd? Jack nodded. "Started background checks immediately. Mark Wilson isn't just a failed Wall Street broker. He's a professional con artist, one with a long trail of victims." White's pen froze mid-note. "Go on." "What happened to Mr. Thompson yesterday," Jack continued, "wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of an 18-month pattern of elder financial abuse." He flipped open the briefcase like a surgeon revealing a tray of instruments. Out came bank statements, surveillance photographs, transcripts of interviews. Each piece of evidence laid out in a neat, damning procession. The paper smelled faintly of printer ink, but what it represented was far more corrosive, the undeniable proof of greed and betrayal. White leaned forward, scanning the photographs. In one, Mark stood outside a Cleveland notary office, shaking hands with a thin man whose nervous eyes darted toward the camera. "Richard Stone," Jack explained, "the notary who falsified documents for a $10,000 bribe." "You have him on tape?" White asked. "Audio and video," Jack replied without missing a beat, "plus his signed confession as of this morning. He's cooperating fully to avoid federal charges." My throat tightened. "How much money are we talking about, Jack?" Jack's gaze was steady, but his voice carried the weight of a truth no one wanted to hear. "Across all his victims? Nearly $4 million. The figure hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. It wasn't just a number. It was lives hollowed out, retirement stolen, trust shattered, and it was my family's name tangled in it. My daughter's husband, my daughter's silence. Your case, Jack said, was supposed to be his retirement score. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the acrid smoke curling from the ruins of a house fire. $4 million. Not just a number, an entire lifetime's worth of labor and sacrifice, stolen from people who had already weathered storms most couldn't imagine. These were men and women who had survived wars, recessions, and personal heartbreaks, who had pinched pennies for decades to build modest, fragile security. People like me, people who once believed that the bonds of blood were stronger than the lure of easy money. Detective White's voice was calm but deliberate. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to walk me through yesterday's events one more time. Every detail matters for the prosecution." And so, for the next hour, I became both witness and storyteller. I told them about Mark's smug arrogance, The way his smile tightened when I asked questions he didn't want to answer. I told him about Emily, my Emily, how her eyes darted away from mine, as if the weight of her own guilt might shatter her. I described the moment my trembling hands dialed 911, my dining room table buried under their forged documents, like a gambler's table cover-tied with marked cards. Except here, the stakes had been my life, my trust, my future. Jack filled in the spaces between my words with the precision of a man assembling the final pieces of a trap. He slid photographs across the table, grainy shots of Mark shaking hands in alleyways, meeting shady figures in parking lots. Audio recordings crackled to life, filled with the casual tone of a predator who thought himself untouchable. Financial reports detailed the cold mathematics of greed, dates, transfers, offshore accounts. Each page was another nail in Mark Wilson's coffin. Detective White glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Your daughter," he said carefully, "has been cooperating with our investigation." The words felt strange, almost foreign, as though spoken in another language. "Cooperating how?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "She's provided details about Mark's other schemes, names, methods, contacts. She claims she didn't understand the full scope of his criminal activities." Through the small, square window in the interview room, I could see Cleveland's skyline under a pale morning sun. This was the city where I'd built a life with Martha, where we'd raised Emily, where I'd believed, with the unshakable certainty of a father, that family was sacred. And now, here it was, the same city, bearing silent witness as my daughter betrayed her husband to claw her way toward her own freedom. "Will she testify against him?" I asked. "Most likely," White replied. "Her cooperation could significantly reduce her own sentence." Jack shut his briefcase with a clean, confident snap. "Detective, with the evidence we've compiled, Mark Wilson is looking at serious federal time, document forgery, wire fraud, elder abuse across state lines. Conservatively, we're talking 7 to 10 years minimum." Detective White stacked his notes neatly, his movements methodical. "Mr. Thompson will need you ready to testify when this goes to trial. Given the strength of the case, I expect he'll try to plead guilty to avoid a longer sentence." "How soon?" I asked. "Probably within the month. Federal prosecutors move quickly when a case is this solid." I rose slowly, every joint in my body echoing the years I carried. Yesterday, I'd been the victim. Today, I was the witness. Tomorrow, I would be something else entirely. A man whose family had been gutted by greed, yet whose dignity, somehow, had survived the fire. I looked at Detective White, my voice low but unwavering. "Detective, can I ask you something?" He met my gaze. "Of course." "In your experience," I asked quietly, "do families ever recover from something like this?" Detective White's eyes softened, the way a man's do when he's seen more loss than joy in his line of work. He leaned back in his chair, letting the silence stretch before speaking, as if weighing whether the truth would help or hurt. "Mr. Thompson," he said finally, his voice low, "money destroys more families than alcohol, drugs, or adultery combined. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Not because no one wants to, but because the ground they stood on is gone. But sometimes," he paused, "sometimes losing the bridge isn't the worst thing. It just forces you to find solid ground elsewhere." His words stayed with me, echoing long after I left the station. 2 weeks dragged by like wounded animals crawling toward shelter. Life moved, but in slow, painful increments. My home, my sanctuary, felt different now. Not quite violated, but altered in a way that left me unsettled. The air seemed heavier. Shadows lingered longer. Every room whispered reminders of that Saturday's confrontation. The dining table where the forged documents had sat like poisonous fruit. The hallway where Emily's voice had cracked when I told her I knew. The living room where Mark had smirked like a man convinced he was untouchable. The phone became both lifeline and tormentor. Reporters wanted dramatic sound bites about betrayal and greed. Lawyers called to explain legal procedures in language that made my head ache. Bank officials offered apologies so rehearsed they might as well have been read from cue cards. I learned to answer selectively. Some calls got my voice. Others went straight to the machine. Let it filter the noise from the truth. On Tuesday morning, Jack Reed's voice broke through the fog. "Robert," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction beneath his calm tone. "The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit raided Mark's New York office yesterday. Full sweep, computers, hard drives, filing cabinets, the works. It looked like a movie set, only the ending's not going to be happy for him." I took a sip of coffee, and for the first time in days, it didn't taste bitter. "What did they find?" I asked. 4 more victims, Jack said grimly. "All elderly, all taken for everything they had, using variations of that same Florida retirement scam he tried on you. One couple in Buffalo lost their entire pension, $600,000. He had a whole operation running, fake websites, glossy brochures that looked like they'd been designed by top marketing firms, even hired actors to pose as happy residents in facilities that didn't exist. The man built an empire on lies." I set my mug down slowly. The mental image formed uninvited. Mark orchestrating the entire fraud like a theater director, every detail designed to manipulate trust, every performance aimed at an audience too polite, too hopeful, to suspect the play was a con. Through my kitchen window, I saw Mrs. Patterson tending her garden, just as she had every morning for the past 20 years. Steady, consistent, honest. The kind of life built on the quiet dignity of work and truth. A life Mark would never understand because he'd spent his own chasing shortcuts, convinced that cleverness could replace character. By Thursday, another call came, this one from a voice I hadn't expected to hear. "Mr. Thompson, this is Assistant District Attorney Lisa Anderson. I'm the lead prosecutor on your case, and I wanted to update you on some developments." I straightened in my chair. "I'm listening," I said. Her tone was brisk, professional, but beneath it, I detected the faint current of resolve, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who takes justice personally. Emily had agreed to testify against her husband. The words hit me like a strange, bittersweet blow. Relief and heartbreak tangled into one knot. According to the assistant district attorney, she'd provided them with a roadmap into Mark's criminal empire. Names of other victims, accounts of his manipulations, and records proving a web of systematic fraud stretching back at least 3 years. 3 years minimum. They suspected it went back further, but anything before 2022 had been methodically erased, shredded, and scrubbed clean. The work of a man who knew exactly how to bury his tracks. Now, my son-in-law was staring down a stack of federal charges hefty enough to keep him behind bars for a decade, maybe longer. That afternoon, I drove to the bank, the very place where Mark had almost stolen the bulk of my life's work. I could still remember standing in that lobby weeks earlier, my signature being questioned, my account nearly emptied under the guise of legitimacy. The bank manager, Michael Green, came out from behind his glass office with a nervous energy, his handshake damp and too quick. His voice was all contrition, the kind of tone you hear from someone who knows they're standing on the thin ice of professional survival. "Mr. Thompson, I can't express how sorry we are about this situation," he began, eyes flicking down as though ashamed to meet mine. "Our security protocols should have caught the irregularities immediately." "Should have," I said evenly, "but didn't." His Adam's apple bobbed. "No, sir, they didn't." He went on to explain that as part of their damage control, the bank was crediting my account with additional interest, waiving all fees, and implementing new verification measures to prevent this kind of breach from happening again. Then he handed me a crisp printout. My eyes landed on the figure, $1,247,892.43. It was more money than I had ever seen collected in one place under my name, returned with interest, as though Mark's betrayal had in some twisted way made me wealthier. If I'd been a different kind of man, maybe I would have laughed at the irony. Instead, all I felt was the hollow ache of knowing that every dollar on that page had been washed in the acid of what it had cost me, my family. Friday evening brought Jack to my doorstep. He was holding a bottle of bourbon, like it was both an offering and an apology. We settled into the living room, him taking Martha's old chair without needing to ask, me pouring 2 glasses of amber into the quiet between us. "Richard Stone confessed to everything," Jack said finally, the words settling heavy in the air. Turns out Mark had him in his pocket for over a year. Bribes, falsified documents. Stone was his inside man on multiple schemes. "What's he looking at?" I asked. 5 years federal, Jack replied. "He'll probably serve 3 with good behavior, and the other victims, most of them will get their money back." Mark wasn't stupid enough to burn it all on fast cars and champagne. He kept most of it in accounts we could trace. It's almost like he was stockpiling. "For what?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Jack's face tightened. Based on his computer files, he was aiming for 10 million. Once he hit that number, he was going to vanish. Non-extradition country, no looking back. Your case would have pushed him over 8 million. We both took long, slow sips. The bourbon burned in my throat, warm and sharp, while the silence between us grew thick. 2 old men staring at the arithmetic of betrayal, 8 million stolen from people who had trusted in the decency of their families, the reliability of their banks, the protection of their government. 8 million earned not through hard work, but through the calculated dismantling of someone else's life. After a while, I set my glass down. "Jack," I said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" He leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. "Shoot." "In all your years chasing down fraudsters," I asked him, "the ones that tear through families like a hurricane, do the victims ever really recover?" Jack didn't answer right away. He just stared into the amber depths of his bourbon, as though the swirling liquid might hold the wisdom I was asking for. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, like a man who'd seen more than his share of wreckage. "Financially, most of the time, yeah. Money can be replaced, paper can be reprinted. But emotionally," he let the thought hang there, shoulders lifting in a slow, helpless shrug. "That depends on the person. Some people, they let betrayal seep into their bones, turn it into poison that taints every corner of their lives. Others," he swirled his glass, eyes far away, "others use it as fertilizer, pain feeding something stronger, deeper. But it's never the same garden it was before." Before I could reply, the phone rang. I let it go to the answering machine. Lately, I'd been letting most calls go there, but then the voice came, and the sound of it froze both of us in place. "Dad, it's Emily." My chest tightened. "Please pick up. I know you are there. The trial's set for next month, and I need to talk to you before then. There are things you don't know. Things about Mark I should have told you years ago. Please, Dad, I'm still your daughter." The machine clicked off. Silence settled over the room like a heavy fog, thick and unmoving. Outside, the sun had begun its slow descent, shadows stretching long fingers across the lawn. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 7 times, each note echoing like a reminder of time slipping away. Jack drained the last of his bourbon, then stood. "That's your decision to make, Robert. But whatever you do, make sure it's what's best for you, not what's easiest for her." After he left, I stayed where I was, staring at the family photographs that lined the mantel. Emily's graduation, her wedding day, a little girl with scraped knees hugging my neck like I was her whole world. I wondered if love could survive a betrayal so complete, or if some wounds cut so deep that even forgiveness couldn't find its way in. The trial date loomed in my mind. August 9th, 3 weeks, 21 days to decide whether I still had a daughter worth saving, or just a stranger who shared my blood and had stood beside the man who tried to steal my life. On the morning of the trial, the Cuyahoga County Courthouse rose from downtown Cleveland like a stone sentinel, its weathered limestone facade etched with decades of rain, snow, and human drama. I'd put on my best Navy suit, the same one Emily had chosen for me 5 years earlier, back when Mark was still playing the part of a decent man. Security at the entrance was the usual ritual: metal detectors, bag checks, guards who scanned each face with a weary, watchful gaze. It felt a little like boarding a plane, but in a way I welcomed it. Some betrayals cut deep enough to make people do desperate things. Courtroom 4B was larger than I'd pictured. Tall windows let in wide slashes of morning light, illuminating rows of polished wooden benches that looked more like church pews than seating for a legal proceeding. Somehow that felt right. We were here to witness something sacred, either the resurrection or the burial of whatever was left of my family. Judge Margaret Cole entered the courtroom with the quiet gravity of someone who had spent 2 decades separating truth from deception, mercy from manipulation. Her silver-gray hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, the severe style a perfect match for the crisp fall of her black judicial robes. She carried herself like a woman who had heard every excuse, every tear-stained plea, every desperate lie humanity could conjure, and had learned to see straight through them. "The state of Ohio versus Mark Wilson and Emily Wilson," she announced, her voice clear and firm. "You are here for sentencing, following guilty pleas entered by both defendants." The words hung in the air like a final verdict on our family's history. No trial, no long parade of evidence and witnesses. They had confessed, at least enough to avoid the theater of a courtroom battle. Emily had kept her promise to cooperate, and while part of me wanted to see that as a step toward redemption, another part wondered if it was just another calculated move. Mark sat hunched at the defense table, a shadow of the man I had once, briefly, been fooled into trusting. Gone were the custom-tailored suits, the expensive watch that gleamed like he owned the world. His orange prison jumpsuit sagged on a frame that seemed to have withered since his arrest. His shoulders curved inward as though the weight of his guilt, or perhaps just the weight of losing, was pressing him down. He glanced over his shoulder once, his eyes finding mine in the gallery. The connection lasted no more than a heartbeat before he looked away, quick and guilty, like a bee caught raiding the pantry. Emily sat apart from him at her own table. Her lawyer leaned close, murmuring final instructions. She wore a plain blue dress that could have come from a discount rack, her hair pulled back in a modest style, her face nearly bare of makeup. It was the picture of contrition. She looked small, fragile even, as if a strong wind could blow her away. But I had seen her act before. 45 years of watching my daughter play whatever role was needed to get what she wanted. Prosecutor Lisa Anderson rose to speak. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe, but her voice carried the assurance of someone who had built a career dismantling men like Mark. "Your Honor," she began, "the defendants orchestrated a calculated, multi-state fraud operation targeting elderly victims. Over the course of 3 years, Mr. Mark Wilson stole more than $4 million from senior citizens who trusted him with their life savings." Her tone sharpened as she turned slightly toward Emily. "Mrs. Emily Wilson knowingly aided and abetted these crimes. She facilitated her husband's access to one of the victims, her own father, Robert Thompson, who is present in court today." Judge Cole's gaze followed the prosecutor's gesture and landed on mine. Her eyes were steady, inviting but unflinching. "Mr. Thompson, would you like to make a victim impact statement?" I rose slowly, my knees reminding me of every mile, every year. The room seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't just about fraud. It was about the brutal truth that sometimes the knife in your back comes from your own blood. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, but carrying the kind of weight that comes only from a life lived in full measure. "I've served my country in Vietnam. I've buried my wife of 40 years. I've survived recessions, job losses, and losses that no paycheck could ever fix, but nothing prepared me for the day my own daughter tried to take everything I had spent my life building." The words echoed off the walls, clear enough that even the farthest corners of the gallery could hear. I saw reporters scribbling, cameras shifting toward me. I saw other victims of Mark's schemes nodding, people who understood exactly what it felt like to have trust stripped from you like skin from bone. "The money can be returned," I continued. "My home can be secured. But trust? Trust doesn't come back on a balance sheet. When the betrayal is this close, it rewrites everything you thought you knew about the people you love. It makes you question every memory, every conversation, every smile." I stopped then, because anything more would either break my voice or turn it into something harder than I wanted it to be. But the trust between a father and daughter, once shattered by greed, is a wound that never truly heals. That's the real crime here, not just the theft of assets or the draining of bank accounts, but the theft of something far more fragile and irreplaceable. The love that anchors a family, the faith that your children will protect you in your final years instead of calculating how to exploit you. It is the robbery of peace, of security, of the quiet comfort in believing blood will always stand by blood. I lowered myself back into my seat, my knees stiff, my heart heavier than I could remember. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Every person in that room seemed to understand that what had just been said wasn't just about numbers or legal codes, but about the cost of betrayal written on the soul. Judge Cole, impassive as ever, made a few notes before turning her sharp gaze toward the defendants. "Mr. Wilson," she began, her voice carrying the weight of both authority and condemnation, "you have pleaded guilty to federal charges of wire fraud, document forgery, and elder financial abuse. The evidence presented shows a deliberate and repeated pattern of predatory behavior that targeted some of the most vulnerable members of our community. You exploited not only professional relationships, but the sacred trust within a family, all for personal enrichment." Mark's lawyer rose, trying to inject some lifeline into the sinking wreck of his client's future. "Your Honor, my client is prepared to make full restitution. He has cooperated extensively with federal investigators and provided information that has aided in the recovery of stolen funds from other victims." "Cooperation noted," Judge Cole replied, her tone brisk, almost clipped. "However, the magnitude and sophistication of these crimes demand a sentence that reflects their seriousness." Her words fell like the steady tolling of a bell. "I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and full restitution to all identified victims." 8 years. Mark would be 53 when he walked out, if he walked out early for good behavior. By then, his Wall Street career would be 10, his reputation ground into the dirt, his marriage very likely in shambles. He took the sentence with the stillness of a man whose worst nightmare had already been pacing outside his cell, waiting for him. Then Judge Cole shifted her attention. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, and I felt every muscle in my body tighten. "Your cooperation with authorities and your status as a first-time offender weigh in your favor. However, you participated in the financial exploitation of your own father, a betrayal that this court finds particularly reprehensible." Emily's lips trembled before the first tears slid down her cheek. This time there was no sense of stagecraft, no calculated tilt of the head or well-timed dab of a tissue. These were real tears, the kind that come when the illusion of control crumbles and you realize the hammer has already fallen. "I sentence you," Judge Cole continued, "to 2 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service, specifically serving elderly victims of financial crimes, and restitution in the amount of $50,000 to a fund dedicated to elder abuse prevention programs. No jail time, not for Emily." Relief and resentment crashed against each other inside me like two opposing tides. The court had spoken, but justice felt complicated. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and just like that, it was over. The machinery of justice moved on, efficient and impersonal. Mark was led away in handcuffs, his broad frame slightly hunched. His shoulders shook, whether from suppressed sobs or smoldering rage, I couldn't tell. Emily stayed. When the benches began to empty, she walked toward me. Her face was streaked with tears that, for once, didn't look rehearsed. "Dad," she began, her voice raw, "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know it can't undo what I raised my hand, the gesture halting her mid-sentence. "You made your choices, Emily," I said quietly, each word measured. "And I've made mine." She stopped, frozen for a heartbeat, then lowered her eyes. Around us, the courtroom echoed with the shuffle of departing footsteps, but between us there was only the silence of a bridge burned to ash. "We both have to live with the consequences," she whispered, her voice trembling as if afraid to shatter the fragile space between us. "Does that mean you'll never forgive me?" I looked at the woman standing before me, my daughter, the one who carried Martha's eyes, the same eyes that once held nothing but love and trust. But now those eyes were clouded with regret, haunted by the choices she had made. Choices born of greed instead of family, of betrayal instead of love. The answer wasn't simple. Forgiveness never is. It's a road paved with doubt, pain, and broken promises. "I'm still deciding," I said slowly, feeling the weight of every word, "whether the daughter I raised is still in there somewhere, or if she had the day you brought those forged papers into my home." Without waiting for a reply, I turned away and walked out of the courthouse, leaving her standing alone in that vast, echoing lobby. The sound of her footsteps faded behind me, swallowed by the heavy silence and the unspoken weight of justice rendered. Outside, Cleveland's summer heat hit me like a wall, hot, unrelenting, but somehow cleaner, more honest than the stale, charged air inside the courtroom. Justice had been served. My money was safe. Mark would spend the next 8 years learning the hard truth. That cleverness without character is a fool's gamble, one that ultimately destroys itself. But as I descended the courthouse steps, heading toward whatever came next, I carried with me a truth harsher than any sentence. Some victories demand a price far higher than defeat, and some family wounds never fully heal. They don't bleed forever. They scar. And those scars serve as painful reminders to guard your heart more carefully, to be more cautious about who you trust with the most fragile parts of yourself. The drive home wound through neighborhoods I'd known for decades. The corner bakery where Martha had lovingly chosen birthday cakes. The hardware store where I'd picked out tools to build Emily's treehouse. Everything looked the same, but I was seeing it through different eyes. The eyes of a man who had won his final battle, yet lost his family in the process. My house stood exactly where I'd left it, white siding glowing softly in the afternoon sun, Martha's rose bushes blooming defiantly despite everything that had happened behind those walls. I parked in the driveway and sat for a long moment, keys in hand, trying to process the strange, heavy relief of coming home to a place that was mine again. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor next door, was watering her garden when I stepped out of the car. She dropped her hose and hurried over, her excitement bubbling over like someone who had been waiting weeks to share this moment. "Robert," she said, breathless, "we saw it on the news. 8 years for that awful man, and your daughter cooperating with the police. You must feel vindicated." Vindicated? I repeated the word slowly, tasting it like wine that might have soured in the glass. "That's one way to put it, Martha." "Well," she smiled warmly, "you showed everyone that just because we're older doesn't mean we're easy targets." "My grandson called last night," he said. "Wanted to check on my finances after seeing your story on Channel 5. Inside the house, everything was as I had left it, but somehow everything felt different. The dining room table, once the battlefield where Mark had spread his forged documents like weapons, now sat quietly, a silent witness to the war that had ended there. The living room chair, where Emily had cried so many tears, still seemed to hold the ghost of her sorrow. And I sat there feeling the ache of all that was lost, all that could never be repaired, and wondering how to live with the echoes of a family broken and forever changed. I moved through each room with quiet determination, reclaiming ground that had never truly been lost, yet somehow felt violated all the same. The walls held memories, echoes of laughter, arguments, and quiet moments shared. But now they seemed to carry a weight, a shadow cast by the betrayal that had passed through them. In my bedroom, I approached the safe where I kept the most important papers. The deeds, the accounts, the records of a lifetime of hard work and trust. I opened it with deliberate care, relief washing over me as I found everything untouched, exactly as I had left it. Mark, in his arrogance and greed, had been confident enough in his forged signatures not even to search for the real documents. The clock on the wall ticked past 4 as the phone rang sharply, breaking the silence. "Mr. Thompson," came the voice of Michael Green, the bank manager, professional yet tinged with genuine relief and embarrassment for what had occurred. "I have excellent news. Your account has been fully restored. $1,347,000, including probable compensation for the inconvenience and additional interest accrued during the investigation. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. A sum that could have bought comfort for the rest of my days, traveled to any place my heart desired, or whatever else fancy might strike. But sitting alone in my living room, surrounded by family photographs now feeling more like pieces of evidence than reminders of love, I realized that money without someone to share it with was nothing but cold numbers on a sterile bank statement. "Mr. Green," I said quietly, "I appreciate everything the bank has done to make this right. Is there anything else we can do for you, sir?" His voice asked gently. Perhaps we could arrange enhanced security measures or a financial advisor to help manage your accounts. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. I'll let you know if I need anything. After hanging up, the house settled into its familiar evening quiet. I prepared a simple dinner for one, washed the dishes, and settled into my chair with the newspaper in hand. Small, ordinary acts in a home that felt anything but ordinary. At 7:30, the front doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Frank Conover from the VFW Post standing there, clutching a casserole dish, his face set with the quiet resolve of a man on a mission. "Frank," I greeted him, opening the door. "What brings you by?" "I heard about the trial on the Veterans Network," he said, stepping inside. "Figured you might need some company and a decent meal." He placed the casserole on the kitchen counter with the precision of a soldier on duty. Tuna noodle casserole, Martha's recipe, the one she'd perfected over the years. "And before you say you're fine," Frank added, "remember we've all been through battles where victory doesn't feel much like a celebration." We ate together at my kitchen table. Two old soldiers who understood that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought after the shooting stops. "You did right, Robert," Frank said quietly. "Family or not, you can't let people steal your dignity along with your money." "It doesn't make it hurt any less," I replied. "No, it doesn't," he agreed, "but it makes it an honorable hurt instead of a stupid one." After Frank left, I sat alone with my thoughts, carrying the weight of 1.3 million that now felt less like a blessing and more like a solemn responsibility. Outside my kitchen window, the evening shadows lengthened, and somewhere far off, a church bell tolled 9 times, each chime a reminder of time's unyielding march. I picked up the phone and dialed directory assistance. "Directory assistance," the calm voice answered. "What city?" "Cleveland. I need the number for the Veterans Crisis Support Center." "Connecting you now." "Veteran Support, this is Jim. How can I help you?" "Jim, my name is Robert Thompson. I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I want to make a donation, a substantial one, to help homeless veterans." "That's wonderful, sir," Jim replied warmly. "May I ask what inspired such generosity?" I looked around my reclaimed house at the photographs of a family that no longer was, and at a victory that felt more like survival than triumph. "It's time," I said softly, "to give back to those who still need a hand to hold." Let's just say I learned the hard way the difference between having a house and having a home. A house is just 4 walls and a roof, cold, empty, sometimes even a cage. A home is something far more fragile and precious. It's where love lives, where memories breathe, where you feel safe even when the world outside is harsh. After everything I'd been through, I realized how many veterans out there have neither. They don't have a house, and they certainly don't have a home. And I wanted to do something about that, to help those who had served our country avoid sleeping on the streets, forgotten and alone. The Veteran Support Center was housed in an old converted warehouse on the east side of Cleveland. Its brick facade was weathered and worn by decades of rain and sun, but it carried a quiet dignity, like a battle-scarred veteran who'd seen too much but still stood strong. Over the years, I'd driven past it dozens of times without really seeing it, not because it was hidden, but because sometimes you look without truly noticing. You ignore things until they become personal, until they matter. Jim McAllister met me at the front door, a man in his 50s with the bearing of someone who had served overseas, and the compassion of a man who understood that battles don't always end when you come home. His eyes held stories of pain and resilience, the kind only shared in silence. "Mr. Thompson," he said warmly, "thank you for coming. When you mentioned a substantial donation last night, I have to admit I was curious about the amount." I told him, $300,000. He stopped walking and stared at me like I just told him I was donating a spaceship. "300, sir?" His voice was thick with disbelief and gratitude. "That's enough to house and feed veterans for an entire year. That's enough to change lives." "That's the idea," I said quietly. He led me through the center, past dormitory-style rooms where men and women who had served their country now struggled to find the most basic shelter. In the common room, a Vietnam veteran about my age was patiently teaching a younger man how to fill out job applications, passing on the tools to rebuild a life one step at a time. I thought about Mark, my former son-in-law, who had threatened to put me in a place like this if I didn't cooperate with his schemes. Somehow it felt fitting, no, necessary, to turn his threat into something positive, to transform that darkness into hope for others. We completed the paperwork in Jim's modest office, surrounded by thank you letters from veterans who had gotten back on their feet with the center's help. As I signed the donation check, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced since Martha's death, the quiet, deep fulfillment of making someone else's life better. "Mr. Thompson," Jim said with a hopeful smile, "this donation will help us expand into transitional housing. Veterans won't just have emergency shelter anymore. They'll have the time and support they need to rebuild their lives." Driving home that evening, I realized that the house wasn't quite as empty as it had felt yesterday. There was still too much silence, too many echoes from conversations that would never happen again. But somewhere there was also a faint light of hope flickering in the distance. Later, as the sun began to set, I drove past the Cuyahoga County Animal Shelter on the outskirts of town. The low building was surrounded by chain-link fencing, and the distant sounds of dogs longing for second chances drifted through the evening air. Reminders that sometimes even those we think are forgotten can find a way back. I hadn't planned to stop at the animal shelter that day, but as I passed, a faded sign advertising senior dog adoptions caught my eye. There was something about the idea, older dogs needing a home, just like me, that tugged at a part of me I hadn't realized was still tender. On a whim, I stepped inside. "Looking for anything specific?" a volunteer asked warmly as I approached the front desk, her eyes kind but curious. "Something that needs a home as much as I need company," I replied quietly. She smiled and led me through the shelter, down a narrow corridor where the older dogs waited patiently. These were animals past their prime, their muzzles graying, their movements slower, but their dignity intact. They'd been through life's hardships and still held on to hope. Hope for a family who would see past the wrinkles and tired eyes to offer love and kindness. "This is Buddy," she said, stopping in front of a kennel. Inside sat a golden retriever mix with cloudy eyes and a gentle expression that seemed to hold the wisdom of many years. "He's 8 years old, house-trained, and great with people. His previous owner passed away, and the family couldn't keep him." Buddy looked up at me then, his gaze steady and calm, as if he understood that sometimes life changes without warning. But that didn't mean you stopped believing in kindness. "Can I take him for a walk?" I asked. 15 minutes later, Buddy and I sat quietly in my car, both of us trying to make sense of this sudden, unexpected partnership. He settled into the passenger seat with the kind of contentment that comes from finally finding what you've been searching for, even if you don't fully understand it yet. At home, Buddy explored the house with polite curiosity, sniffing corners and tilting his head at the familiar and unfamiliar smells. I set up food and water bowls in the kitchen, feeling the house shift around us. Having another living being there changed everything. The acoustics softened, filled with footsteps, quiet breathing, and the occasional jingle of dog tags. Suddenly, the silence was replaced with a soundtrack of companionship. Later that evening, a mailman delivered a thick envelope addressed in handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Emily's. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity and something deeper, hope maybe, pushed me forward. Inside were 3 pages of neat, careful script, clearly written and rewritten many times. "Dad," the letter began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Not just sorry that we got caught, but sorry that I ever thought money was more important than your trust." She went on, confessing how Mark had convinced her they were helping me, that I'd thank them later when the investments grew rich. "I see now how stupid that sounds," she wrote, "how obviously wrong it was." I read her words twice, sitting in my chair with Buddy dozing peacefully at my feet. She detailed her financial ruin, the collapse of her marriage, and her desperate attempts to find work with a criminal record hanging over her like a shadow. She begged for forgiveness, promising to repay every penny, swearing she had learned her lesson about greed and the sacredness of family loyalty. At the bottom of the 3rd page, she wrote something that cut through the distance between us like a knife. "I know I have no right to ask this, but could you ever forgive me? Not for my sake, but because I can't bear the thought of you dying alone and angry." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer alongside other documents I might one day need, but hope never to look at too often. Then I reached down to scratch Buddy's ears, feeling the simple, pure comfort of unconditional companionship. "What do you think, boy?" I whispered. "Some mistakes are too big for forgiveness, and some people wait too long to discover what really matters." Buddy thumped his tail against the floor, offering the kind of wordless solace money couldn't buy and family had failed to provide. Just then the phone rang. It was 8 o'clock. Sarah Campbell from the Cleveland Plain Dealer called me one afternoon, her voice carrying the unmistakable enthusiasm of a reporter who had uncovered a story worth telling. Not just for its legal drama, but for the deeper truths it revealed about family, trust, and the quiet but fierce fight against elder abuse. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you don't mind me calling. We'd like to do a feature story about your case. Not just the legal aspects, but what it says about family, trust, and standing up against those who prey on the vulnerable." I glanced down at Buddy, who was calmly watching me with those watchfully patient eyes. It struck me then that my story was about so much more than personal betrayal or courtroom victories. It was about something bigger, something that could maybe help others facing similar darkness. "Miss Campbell, when would you like to talk?" I asked. When the day came, I sat in my living room chair, Buddy loyally settled at my feet. The newspaper's photographer adjusted his camera settings, preparing to capture more than just an image, but a story that mattered. Sarah reviewed her notes one last time, her questions crafted not just to collect facts, but to unearth meaning. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "when you first suspected your daughter and son-in-law were trying to defraud you, what went through your mind?" I paused, memories swirling like storm clouds. Disbelief, then disappointment, but after that, determination. I'd spent my life teaching Emily about integrity, about family loyalty. When she chose greed over those values, I realized I had to decide whether to be a victim or a fighter. Her pen raced across the notepad, capturing each word like a lifeline to others who might hear the story. "You hired a private investigator before going to the police," Sarah noted. "That shows remarkable foresight." I nodded slowly. Military training never really leaves you. You assess the threat, gather intelligence, then engage the enemy. In this case, the enemy was wearing familiar faces. For 2 hours, the interview unfolded. Stories of my Vietnam service, Martha's death, and the night I dialed 911 with forged documents spread across my dining room table. Sarah's thoughtful questions helped me see my story with fresh eyes, painful but necessary. "What advice would you give to other elderly people who might face similar situations?" she asked. "Trust your instincts," I said firmly. "If something feels wrong, it probably is. Even if it's family members doing the wrong. Document everything. Seek professional help. And remember, age doesn't make you helpless unless you choose to be." The weeks that followed brought more calls. Channel 5 News wanted me for a television interview on their senior citizen advocacy segment. Then the Veterans Organization invited me to speak at their monthly meeting about financial security for aging members. Standing at the podium in the VFW hall, looking out at faces weathered by war and civilian life alike, I felt the heavy honor of representing more than just my own experience. "Brothers and sisters," I told them, "we've all faced enemies overseas. Now we face a different kind of enemy at home, a day in home. People who see our age as weakness, our trust as an opportunity, and our hard-earned savings as their personal jackpot." The applause was genuine, but more meaningful were the conversations afterward. 3 veterans approached me privately, sharing their own stories of financial manipulation by adult children, caretakers, even supposed investment advisors. "Robert," said Bill McCarthy, a Korean War veteran with eyes that had seen too much, "my nephew tried to talk me into signing over my house last month. After hearing your story, I told him to take a long walk off a short pier." Driving home from that VFW meeting, I realized my personal battle had become something larger, a beacon for others, a warning signal to the vulnerable, a reminder that self-defense doesn't end when you turn 75. The feature story in the Cleveland Plain Dealer ran on Sunday morning, complete with photographs of me and Buddy, and a thoughtfully written sidebar explaining how to recognize the signs of elder financial abuse. By Monday afternoon, my phone was ringing off the hook. 17 calls from strangers who shared their own heartbreaking stories, asked for advice, or simply thanked me for having the courage to speak out about family betrayal so openly. Tuesday brought an unexpected call from a producer at a national news program interested in featuring my case as part of a broader series on elder abuse. Proof that what I had endured was not isolated, but part of a much larger problem. Then on Wednesday, a law enforcement agency reached out, requesting permission to use my story as a training example for police officers learning to identify and investigate elder fraud. Sitting on the front porch that evening, I scratched behind Buddy's ears as we watched the sun dip below the horizon, bathing our quiet neighborhood in a warm golden glow. "Buddy," I said softly, "it seems our little family drama has turned into something bigger. A public service announcement, no less." The attention was both flattering and overwhelming. I wasn't comfortable becoming famous simply for surviving my daughter's betrayal, but deep down I understood that the publicity might help others recognize similar dangers lurking quietly in their own homes. Thursday evening, my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was small, distant, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken regrets. "Dad, I saw the article," she said hesitantly. "I'm glad you're helping others, but seeing our family's private business splashed across the front page like that, it's hard." I took a breath, feeling Buddy's steady gaze on me. "Emily, our family business stopped being private the moment you and Mark forced me into fraud. I didn't choose this spotlight, but I'm not going to waste it. Are you ever going to forgive me?" Her silence spoke volumes, and I looked down at Buddy, whose eyes held the patient wisdom of an animal who understands that some questions don't have simple answers. "Forgiveness isn't a gift you give once and forget," I said gently. "It's something you work toward, day by day, if both people are willing to put in the effort. Right now, I'm focused on healing from what you did to me, not on making you feel better about it." There was a long pause. Finally, she whispered, "I understand. I hope someday." "Someday is a long way off, Emily," I replied. "Maybe start with today. Make better choices going forward." When she hung up, I stayed on the porch with Buddy, watching as the stars slowly emerged one by one over the Cleveland skyline. Somewhere across town, my daughter was living with the consequences of choosing money over family. Somewhere in a federal prison, Mark was learning the hard truth. Cleverness without character only leads to destruction. And here in the quiet house that finally felt truly mine again, an old soldier was coming to understand that sometimes the best victory isn't the one that gives you everything you ever wanted, but the one that teaches you what really matters. The phone stopped ringing quite so often. Interview requests grew less frequent, but the impact of my story continued, quietly, invisibly, in ways I couldn't always see. Other elderly people started recognizing the warning signs of con artists. Other families began having the difficult, honest conversations about money and trust. Other victims found the courage to fight back instead of surrendering. Maybe that's what justice really looks like. Not just punishment for the guilty, but protection for the innocent who come after. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.